Okay, I guess now we got everyone on the line. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining for ASC's Metropolitan LA Branch's Innovation in Engineering panel. As you guys may or may not know, the reason we put on this panel was kind of in conjunction with the celebration of Engineers Week, which is what we do every year to kind of celebrate people getting involved in the engineering industry and learning more about what kind of goes into it and all the different, I guess, contributions that we make to society. So along those lines, one of the kind of key things that we think is important on the engineering side is to always be pushing the envelope and to bring innovation into everything that we do. I would just like to thank everyone again for joining us and to get this started. First off, I would just like to thank all of our panelists who've agreed to kind of talk about their projects and answer some of the questions people have regarding innovation and how we go about implementing it and getting it to encouraging the implementation of innovation in all the things that we do. We've got quite a wide range from our panelists, representing both public and private sector. We have Christine Houston, who's the manager of the sustainable practices for the Port of Long Beach. We have Josiah Kane, the director of innovation from Sherwood Design Engineers. We have Dr. Sujaya Kalanasan, who's the Office Chief Division of Local Assistance for Caltrans. And we also have Jonathan Luong from the Assistant Director, who's the Assistant Director for the Water Quality Division for LADWP. As we've created a few questions that we thought the panelists would be interested or would be able to talk about, and you as the attendees might find interesting. There's also an opportunity to provide questions that you have that kind of come up during this presentation. Feel free to send those questions along, and Nikki will be kind of handling those questions, and we'll be able to get to them a little bit later on in this presentation. So the first question that we wanted to kind of address, oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Chris Boswell. I'm the president-elect for the Los Angeles Metropolitan Branch for ASCE. And Nikki is supporting me as a co-moderator for this event, and it's been a great asset here. So as we're getting started, the first question we wanted to ask our panelists, which we think would be relevant to all of the panelists, would be to tell us about an innovative idea that you or your work has implemented, which has proven to be very successful. I think we can start this question over to Christine, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and happy Engineers Week to everyone. I'm the manager of sustainable practices at the Port of Long Beach. I've worked there for 25 years, and I'm a geologist who works as an environmental scientist, but also works on a lot of engineering projects, including a microgrid project that we're doing right now. So the project I wanted to highlight is something that was innovative and successful, is our shore power program. We started working with the Port of Los Angeles in the early 2000s, and with the objective of putting together a plan to mitigate harmful air emission impacts from both of these ports in San Pedro Bay. And in 2006, our harbor commissions both adopted a Clean Air Action Plan. One of the strategies we had to look at is reducing ship emissions because they account for about 60% of the pollution in San Pedro Bay. However, one of the problems we have is that we have no jurisdiction over the ships. So unlike car emissions, where you just make a better car, we had no leverage to have the shipping industry make better ships. So what we did was take an idea from the Navy with their cold ironing program and turn that into our shoreside power program. So this is a picture of the plug coming off our first vessel in 2008, and you see the electrical bank where they're going to plug it in. Since 2008, we have worked on several berths with shore power. We've spent over $200 million on this project, and it's been very successful. We've also done a crude oil terminal, which was the first of its kind anywhere in the world for shore power, and was very tricky. As you imagine, high voltage and volatile organic compounds don't mix very well. It was a very complicated project because we're doing a retrofit on existing marine terminals where the berths have to have ships come and go. So we had to work around all the vessel calls. But it's been very successful. We're not finished because the California regulations for 2024 are mandating that roll-on, roll-off ships like car carriers are going to have to be plugged in, and we have 2 terminals with car carriers, so our work is not finished yet. So thanks, Chris. That's all I have to say right now.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And then I think the next one we can throw it over to Josiah.
Hi. I'm Josiah Kane, Director of Innovation at Sherwood Design Engineers. We're headquartered in San Francisco and also do have an office in Los Angeles. I was going to highlight one of Google's campuses that we worked on. It's about 1.2 million square feet, so it's about 5,000 new employees. Nearing completion now. I'm not sure exactly what the move-in date is. Our role was primarily as master water engineers looking at on-site water resources, and this particular project was targeting LEED Platinum as well as Living Building Challenge water pedal, which has mandates for both natural water flow patterns and sort of ecological water systems and transactional water, water supply, and doesn't allow drinking water to be used for non-potable uses. So there was a lot of complexity, but ultimately arrived at an on-site wastewater treatment system that uses native wetlands to treat sewage for reuse on the campus. Technically, to get to net zero, originally in the Living Building Challenge required that you don't have water from off-site at all. We argued that water is no different than energy. If you can net meter energy seasonally, you should be able to net meter water by quality. And the idea being, why should we generate drinking water when our grandparents left us with the cleanest, safest, most reliable drinking water supply ever known to mankind? But we should be able to offset that by generating more recycled water than we use, and exporting that to offset our neighbors' drinking water, getting to net zero that way. And that was accepted, and it became part of the Living Building Challenge. So you can now do that. We're also capturing about 8 million gallons of rainwater from the site, and that's held in these ponds that you can see, and they're being managed for both user experience and stormwater requirements and engineering requirements, and also for drinking water, for non-potable water use. And it's actually blended into recycled water to keep salinity down. so that it doesn't cause corrosion in fixtures or problems with irrigation. So very innovative project for us, unfolded over several years. And you can see the sort of campus loop at the top of the little diagram, the gray diagram. And the reason it's even possible is that this is a property that's a lease on the NASA district campus, which is a much larger Moffett Field, much larger facility. And so on day one, it's only going to deal with water on site, but the infrastructure itself is engineered and equipped to be able to export non-potable water to the rest of that NASA campus, thereby offsetting quite a bit of additional drinking water that's now used for all uses. So a big leap forward as far as almost like a pilot type project that I think projects around the state and around the country even can potentially look to as a sort of research infrastructure platform to see how a large sort of on-site water reuse system can integrate with not only a campus and a larger district scale water infrastructure, but also tied into and integrated with a city scale recycled water infrastructure, and how those different scales can actually make each other more resilient and sustainable over time. So happy to share that.
Great. Thanks so much, Josiah. And then I think we can go over to Sujaya.
Hey Chris, sorry, I got a quick question for Josiah. So Mike Edwards asks, is direct gas capture with sock over stack also planned at port to meet air quality goals?
That's not for me.
That'd be for Christine.
Sorry, that might be for Christine. If you have just for the audience, if you have a specific question tailored to a panelist, please go ahead and write it in there. I sometimes don't catch it until after, and it came in while Josiah was speaking, so I thought this was for you. Sorry.
Gotcha.
Nikki, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I wonder if I can go ahead and put it. All right, so is direct gas capture with sock over stack also planned at port to meet air quality goals?
We have demonstrated that right at the moment and there's no reason that couldn't be valid, except that the Air Resources Board needs to license those technologies, and right at the moment there isn't anything that's licensed. So it's a little bit problematic. The other issue is that they operate off of barges, and the barges have emissions. So that's something that some of our community has been had some issues with. But all of that, I think, can probably be fixed. They're not big barges. They might be able to use fuel cells in the future. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks so much for that. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to kind of identify if it's for a particular panelist, and try to be clear on what it is that you're asking. And then with that, I think we can pass it off to Sujaya. We can talk a little bit from Caltrans perspective.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sujaya Kalainesan. I'm an office chief with Caltrans in Sacramento right now, but I used to work in the LA region before. And I wanted to share this project, which is on the 101 freeway, and it's near Agoura Hills. I chose this project because, to me, innovation is kind of precariously propped on two pillars. One is a challenging need that drives it, and the second is the willingness to look outside the box for a solution. And this shows you that it's a Caltrans project, but it has nothing to do with the roadway. So this structure that you're seeing here is a wildlife crossing, and it spans through 10 lanes there of 101. And its intent is to lead wildlife from one side of the mountain range to the other. So a little bit of history to validate this project. Back in 1926, when 101 was commissioned, what it did was it split the two mountain ranges, Santa Monica Mountains and Santa Susana Mountains. In doing so, it split the habitat for the wildlife, which would cross over and then connect with the national forest. And the Santa Monica Wildlife Conservancy, which was established in 1979, tracked these wildlife, especially the mountain lions, and they identified the impact that the free was having on the habitat in their ability to, reproduce, mate, and hence the dwindling numbers of wildlife. So there was a need to build a wildlife crossing across 101. When we looked at this project initially, we had no clue what the standards was this for. Do you make it ADA compliant? What needs to be the point of connection for a wildlife crossing? How wide? How tall? It was a challenge, and it was a black box. But there were a lot of partners who engaged in this. We engaged with the Santa Monica Mountain Conservancy. There were public involved, several environmental agencies. Our environmental group participated in this actively. So we came up with this design rendering. It's a GIS rendering. The plan is to have a bridge structure, a traditional bridge structure that is 165 feet in 200 feet in dimensions. It's 16.5 feet vertical clearance. I'm just throwing some numbers there for you engineers out there. It's a two-span spread footing bridge. But the bridge is not going to look anything like a traditional bridge. It's going to be completely covered with soil and vegetation. So when a mountain lion decides to cross it, it does not realize it's actually crossing over a structural entity. It's going to look like a natural extension of the mountain. We also looked at a lot of data to decide what is the point at which this bridge needed to be constructed. Apparently, mountain lions like a certain location for which they cross. We looked at using existing culverts, underground culverts under the freeway, but apparently mountain lions don't like that. And so here's a more open infrastructure for them. Because we had to elevate the bridge to, this height, so the elevations on both sides of the mountain matched. And we also wanted to create tapering, slopes for the animals to, climb down gradually. We had to design, or the proposed design is for having a tunnel over the local street. If you look on the lower side of the picture, you'll see Agura Hills Road. So there's a tunnel over that road. So when the animals cross, there's a gradual slope and they can climb down to the other side of the mountain range. You can imagine how large the conversations with the public would have been on this. To me, this is a futuristic idea because we're not talking about roadway at all. And we are mitigating a mindset or an error in roadway design that happened several decades ago. And this also shows that in future, roadway design is about integrating it with the environment. And so I think this is a cool idea. And just in case you're interested, the construction cost for the bridge is almost 50 million and 22 million in right-of-way costs. And it's all going to be donor funded. So if you like the idea, go fund it.
Definitely need to find a GoFundMe account for that, for the mountain lions. Let's see, I think this one.
We'll skip over this and
okay.
Back to it later.
Then I think we can move on to Jonathan. Introduce yourself and.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Engineers Week. I work at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and obviously core to our mission is being able to get drinking water to you all safely and reliably every day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, but also touching on some themes brought up earlier. We want to definitely do it in a sustainable way. Resources are limited, and being very environmentally conscious and doing it in a way that's safe for the community overall. So those are our main challenges. Again, I'm very happy to join you all. I'm very proud that all of you are on this call. I look forward to the engineers who are just starting their careers or in college. You all are the hope for the future. You're going to continue to solve the problems for society as we pass the mantle on. So thanks for taking time to join us. I think the innovation I'm going to share is actually a nautical drone pictured there on the right. That's used to help us monitor our reservoirs for algal blooms and cyanotoxins. It's an interesting technology because I think it touches on a theme that's really coming across, which is taking very precise testing procedures, things that might have traditionally been done in a laboratory, being able to mobilize that, do it in the field, do it to some extent more automated or real time, and doing things in a compact manner. So I think those are some of the themes, as engineers, not only solve problems, but try to kind of create new ideas that help us solve the problems more efficiently. I think that's one of the things. So many of you have probably seen aerial drones to help with survey work or different inspections. These nautical drones allow us to monitor for constituents in the water that might be precursors to algal formations, and particularly for cyanotoxins. It also has, for the mechanical engineers, some interesting levies, levers, and containers that allow us to sample at various depths. So not only can you program the machine or drive it with a joystick, but then you can actually lower containers to collect samples at various depths. So it's an interesting tool. I show it in this picture with 3, not to make things too crowded, but it's an interesting story that this team that helped us develop it, some Caltech engineers and some other researchers from Paris, France, they were actually able, as they continued to have open dialogues with us and paying attention to our needs, actually develop 3 sets of products for us. So over there on the left is a self-contained E. coli testing kit that is in a floatable buoy. So if you could imagine Santa Monica Pier or some other location, a beach, you can actually do E. coli testing at the push of a button, incubate, extract, and get your sample back within 12 to 24 hours. So again, things that used to have to be done in a lab can now be done in the sites of most use. And then the other one pictured in the middle, it's a tank water quality assessment device, multi-parameter. But again, it's just helping us explore how we can really get form factors reduced, get radio communications and telecom, all the things that are needed to kind of get these online monitoring equipment throughout various portions of your system and society. So those are the ones I wanted to share, but again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's really interesting of kind of taking it on the drone side, taking it from the air and putting it into the water. Exciting to see all the different ways that technology can be used and utilized to kind of help us be more efficient. So then one of our other questions that we wanted to ask the panelists, we can start with Jonathan perhaps, and then move over to Sujaya on this one, was what major innovations do you see in the engineering field coming in the next 5 years? So.
Yeah, so again, I think engineers are the lazy person's best friend. They try to automate and make things a little bit easier. Things that used to take a lot of labor and time or effort, we try to simplify those things. So I think that's always not necessarily bragging on the laziness part, but I think there's an inherent need to be able to do things better. Also, I think another trend for the future is really just this big data and data management, ways to capture data that are relevant to decision-making and monitoring. And then ultimately even incorporating that as applied to, say, engineering, validate the formulas. I always kind of get shocked, there's a lot of coefficients that we use. In certain instances, there's plug values. And I think as we collect more data, that's the empirical validation that helps us maybe perhaps adjust models and formulas that we've developed. So, and I think the other approach is really more on like facility design, whether that's a port or a building, school, really the life cycle component of it. So traditionally we put together a spec, drawings, calculations, but now really just getting continuous feedback on performance of facilities. So you really have something from the planning stage, walking end users through the concepts, designing it, constructing it, and then monitoring it from an asset management standpoint for feedback so that the next design can hopefully be improved upon. So it's just really that life cycle design process.
Great point. Sujaya, do you have anything you'd like to contribute?
You could probably scroll to that slide on the test vehicle bed. Yes, yeah. So I kind of wanted to, when this question is put to me, the first thing that came to my mind was connected vehicles. And I think that is kind of the future, perhaps, or at least one of the things in the future for roadway design. So the picture here shows you the Palo Alto connected vehicle testbed. I'm not part of this team, so there's a District 4 team that's specializing on it. All credit goes to them. But this is a partnership between Caltrans, UC Berkeley, and several other connected vehicle entities. So what they're doing on this testbed is having a system that is connected to a traffic signal as well as the unit within a connected vehicle that communicate within each other to each other. So if there's an automated vehicle like a Tesla, maybe it has an onboard unit which communicates with a unit on the traffic signal system, and then they get data on the speed, the queue at the signal. If there's a pedestrian crossing, then how do you prioritize peds versus transit versus freight? So there's a lot of information exchange. Right now, there's a data portal and it's open data, so it can be used by anybody who wants to study these patterns. And this is right now available for 16 intersections on that stretch. I think it's State Route 82. I think this kind of excites me, and I think this is future. To roadway is no more about roadway, it's about the traveler, it's about every entity using that roadway, and it's about making decisions that's data driven, and about being able to test technology and use that to support our decision making. When we design roadways, we always talk about decision making distance, right? If there is an off ramp, then how much time does the driver have before he can decide whether he wants to take that exit or keep continuing straight? So now with a lot of assistance from technology and messages on safety and what to look forward to, I think that changes those design parameters. We aren't there yet. I think we're several decades before we can get there. You know, we need the last non-automated vehicle off the road before we can actually design for them. But then this is the future. In my head, there's another side to future where we also want to blend our design with, with doing bike lanes and not using fossil fuel based cars, and not designing it for cars but for peds, wheelchairs and bikes. So that's one side of it, and here's the other side of it, which is completely driven by technology, and we use data for making our decisions. Over to you, Chris.
Very good points. Seems like there's good data, potentially that whole sector of big data for all the different industries within civil engineering could be impacted, whether it's water quality, vehicles, bridges, earthquakes, all that kind of stuff. There's so many sensors these days that there's a lot that can be done with that.
There's a question, I think that's for me, Chris, if I can answer that. It's about
Sure.
If it's about the design life of the wildlife bridge. Typically, our bridges are designed for 75 years.
Gotcha. Good to know. Those mountain lions will be able to cross back and forth for a long time. Their kids will be able to do it, or pups. Let's see, I think the next question is, we can pass off to Christine, but it's what do you guys, and then Josiah after that, is what do you guys look for when you're looking for engineers to join your team to help foster innovation? Because I know there's a lot of people, a lot of young folk and some older folk who are really interested and passionate about innovating, and kind of curious what your guys' thoughts of how do you go about looking for those engineers? How are you finding that talent? So we'll start with Christine, and then we can go to Josiah after that.
Sure. I think what I'll talk about is a characteristic of an engineer that I think fosters innovation. Since I don't hire engineers, I have hired engineers, but not for doing engineering work. But I think one thing that is very important, and I'm not sure the extent to which it's taught in schools, is the value of working as a team and understanding who your stakeholders are. And that those are internal and external stakeholders. For example, on a project where you're innovating and you're building something new that people haven't used before, it's very important to have as your stakeholders and innovate with people who are going to use it or maintain it. As an example, at the beginning of something, you're innovating with engineers and designers and stuff like that. But my suggestion for how to innovate is really to go all the way down the levels of people who, once everything's commissioned and ready to go, are going to be the users. I'm sure that's the same with Caltrans, how people are going to drive and look, pretty far out at who the stakeholders are. So I think the people that I'm interested in working with are the people who want to find out who those stakeholders are, get to know them, get to know what their expertise is and what they can bring to your project.
Very good point.
I would maybe start a little bit tongue in cheek and just say that I'm not attracted to people who say that they're interested in innovation. Innovation for the sake of innovation is not really a thing. And, you know, innovation doesn't happen because somebody wants to innovate. Innovation happens because there's a problem that needs to be solved. And so, you know, to some extent, innovation has become the new sort of sustainability. Like everybody says they do it. And, you know, as an innovation director, I get invitations to conferences that you wouldn't believe. You know, I won't mention any particular names, but I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time listening to an 80-year-old soft drink company say that they're leading innovation in the world. That's, you know, they're doing the same thing they've been doing for 80 years. So first, some of it is just trying to get through like what innovation actually is, and not just like, yay, innovation, because innovation is only useful if it's making progress. So to dive into that a little deeper, Chris, you mentioned, you know, people being passionate and young engineers being passionate. I mean, to me, that's one of the first things I look for. If somebody's passionate about something that aligns with something that we're trying to solve, that's a good indicator that that person is going to be relentless in trying to find solutions. So I like to see some passion about it, and not just passion about like being an innovator. I think that's kind of an inward looking thing. Like, I want to be an innovator, but it's not actually looking outward at the problems and being passionate about trying to make the world better, which for me is what innovation should be for. I also look for multidisciplinary people. When I see people who have like cut across different industries or different disciplines, different areas of study, to me that sort of suggests someone who's looking for answers and looking for how things are systemic. Most problems are systemic and can't be solved in a silo, but many of the issues that we're facing right now are issues about sort of competing goals across silos. And so, especially in engineering, I feel like innovation right now is very much about cross-disciplinary problem solving. We've worked on resource co-optimization as a strategy. How do you look at net zero energy and net zero water together? That's a classic example, because most net zero energy projects are water consumptive for cooling and things like that. And most net zero water projects are forcing high energy use to deal with, you know, often cooling for us because it's sort of commercial development. So if you can get engineers who are interested in net zero energy on the same team as the people who are trying to do net zero water and get them to co-optimize, you may not get to net zero on either one, but you may end up with a way better project. And so I think getting away from these sort of kitschy siloed goals and looking at more like collaborative, systemic, cross-disciplinary investigations are really what's needed right now. And I think those are unique individuals who are both passionate and able to look at systems and not just defend sort of their territory.
That's a really good point about we can't come up with the solutions all on our own, and oftentimes having those perspectives from a few different disciplines can definitely contribute to having a much better product. Let's see. We can start off with this one. Is what are some of the hurdles for implementation of some of these innovative ideas? I'm sure everyone can talk to about some of the hurdles that they have to deal with on a daily basis, but maybe Jonathan, you can start first and then followed by Christine.
Sure. So I think if you want to be creative and implement something new, there's a couple things. First, just be ready for unexpected challenges, hurdles, and delays, whether that's, you know, stakeholder not clearly defining what their needs are, or maybe a regulatory hurdle or budgeting. There's just numerous hurdles, it seems. It's almost like one step forward, two step back, that classic saying. So you just be ready that it's not going to be a smooth schedule. Some of you that are in project scheduling and want to have a really tight schedule, it's just that's a dream. I think that happens one in a million as far as something really bold and new. And so that really just requires you to be prepared. As Josiah said, I think if you're motivated by passion, I think that's good, because that'll help you endure all those headaches and all those hours you're going to spend on it, because you're still motivated. But they're a little bit more tongue in cheek. I think one of the things we do organizationally is try to have a number of innovative products online in development at any one time, so that when one falls into a snag, at least you got something else to look forward to, and it's not all misery. So I think that's just one thing. And I think another thing is, by nature, I think I'll categorize a number of our engineers, particularly because of our training and background. You know, we like factors of safety. We're taught to be risk averse. And you really can't be risk averse when you want to be bold and creative. There's not going to be a factor of safety of 1. It's going to be less than 1. It may be negative. It may fail. I mean, probably a number of innovative ideas that fail outnumber the ones that succeed 10 to 1. But there's a learning process through all that. And to the extent that society, we learn from it, you individually learn from it, but absolutely be ready to put yourself out there. There's no guarantees.
So very true.
I'll say that I definitely agree with Jonathan, and almost all of my projects fall into at least his first category of having problems everywhere. And in some ways, what you just said, Jonathan, speaks to the fact that a lot of innovative projects don't have any standardization yet. So that's been a lot of our problems with innovative projects, especially demonstrating emerging technologies. For example, because part of our Clean Air Action Plan, one of our goals is to have zero emission cargo handling equipment in all of our marine terminals by 2030. So we've gotten millions of dollars in funding from different agencies to test equipment. But for example, the same type of equipment that what we call yard tractors that move containers from one place to another on the terminals and don't ever go on the roads, there could be 7 manufacturers making new yard tractors, and none of them have the same charging infrastructure or voltage or you know, the amount of time it takes to charge or plugs or anything like that. So, you know, we're being really disruptive with putting infrastructure in for these demonstrations, and probably 6 out of 7 of them aren't going to be there for long, because the lack of standardization is going to make us put something else in when the marine terminal operator finally decides which of those he's going to buy 200 of. Another thing that I think is important to understand with innovation is the idea of credibility. And a lot of times decision makers who are way up the chain from where I am, you know, they don't adopt technology readily, just like those of us who don't buy, you know, the first Apple product that comes out. So, and the many people are obviously really interested in knowing that something works before they decide to give us a budget for it. And one of the ways around that we have found in our group is outside funding helps you get a lot of credibility. So we do spend a lot of time looking for grant funding, not always successful, but we've gotten quite a few projects that way. And that way we bring credibility from the outside to our projects.
Great points. Definitely no easy way to kind of handle these. Just kind of have to take it one stride at a time. See, and then let's see. Next one is how does your organization foster innovation? I'm sure that there's lots of different ways that people can go about doing it, but Josiah, maybe you can talk to this for a little bit, and then after that, Sujaya could chime in.
So what we do at Sherwood is an innovation program that really has a couple of different components. So we have an innovation team that has sort of three functions. One is sort of an internal lab, and that includes one member of every engineering team in addition to my staff. And we are responsible for sort of information flow of tools, metrics, information, ideas between teams. So if New York comes up with a new innovation or a way to solve a problem, we need to make sure that a client who hires our team in Los Angeles gets that same service and has access to those same ideas. It's difficult in every organization. At Sherwood, we sort of put that under the innovation tent. So to some extent, innovation is really just institutional knowledge and making sure that, you know, everyone has the same set of tools and information. And that's been very successful. It's difficult to keep it going, to keep that wheel rolling. I think we've all experienced that those types of efforts can sort of dwindle if you don't continue to give them energy. There's entropy, especially with busy engineers who have other responsibilities and clients to respond to. So we originally called them integrators, these sort of engineers from each team that get together once a week. One of those sort of entropy moments, we renamed them instigators. So they're instigating within their teams to share information and integrate. So I do think there's a little bit of provocateur involved with innovation. You need to instigate. It's doing more than the bare minimum always. If you're going to do innovation, by definition, you're doing more than the bare minimum. So that requires a little bit of instigation, and that culturally is how that's developed. We also provide services to other teams. So we develop kind of a multidisciplinary environment, and we sort of are always looking at the front edge and where the company's trying to go. And then other teams, we sort of encourage them through this instigation process. And also they bring ideas to us, I mean, which is, you know, they're part of innovation. So it's not a team of innovators that go and innovate, but it's a team of people who are constantly working with the whole company to try and get the company to have a culture of innovation. We're sort of the torchbearers of innovation culture. And very often the innovation doesn't come from our team. It comes from other places in the company, and it may not even involve us at times, but we try to keep that candle lit, and we try to make the resources available, and we try to keep that culture and those tools available and the information accessible. So for us, it's a lot about culture and a little bit about process, and then a little bit about your sort of conventional R&D and research and having some time available. We're structured in such a way that we have our own projects, and we fund the innovation program with our own projects. So we're not really overhead. We're just a less profitable team than some of the other ones, and we try to give back to the rest of the firm with that extra time that we have. So that's our structure, and we're going on 10 years, and the program has been very successful.
Well, I will kind of piggyback on what Josiah said there. I think the biggest change that I see within the organization is the change in culture. I joined Caltrans about 12, 13 years back. And at that point, saw a lot of decisions driven top down. Right now, our culture is very different, that a lot of decisions are made bottom up. And the challenge with that, especially being a state agency, we're liable when we don't follow a policy, when we don't follow a design standard. So bringing that change in culture to a state agency is huge. And we're seeing it. We are going to roll out our new strategic management plan. And the entire plan was driven bottom up. All of our employees got to engage in it. They talked about the priorities. They talked about what's important for us and for the people around us. And I think that's huge. And that drives innovation, because it's bringing that culture where you can discuss, where it's okay to disagree. I think, 20 years back, maybe if he had said that standard doesn't make sense, that was like a big red flag. Now we could actually question a standard that's been used for decades. So I think that openness in allowing discussions is huge. we are also seeing a lot of focus on data. Caltrans has decades of data, and we could give you files and files of data if you asked for it, but we wouldn't know what it tells you. Now we're looking at integrating our data. We're looking at what decisions it drives, and we're looking at data governance, which is again another huge thing, where we could pull a project information. It'll be different within different functions depending on who you ask. Now we're trying to make them all flow together, where we're not repeating or creating flat files of our data, and everything is dynamic. And we're displaying a lot of this data to the public for transparency. So there are websites where you could go pull down a project and see exactly where it is in progress or how much money is spent on it. So that way, while driving innovation, we're also accountable and transparent. I think that's a huge change. And I think another thing we do is come to forums like this. We talk about the organization so we can impress the young engineers out there. So when you're exploring your career options, look at Caltrans. There is an innovation expo that happened recently. So if you go on Google and type Caltrans Innovation Expo, you'll see 5 days of videos about all the various innovations that we've been doing. So look at it. And I guess that's how my organization is fostering innovation.
Thank you so much. Sorry I dropped off. I had issues with the Wi-Fi. Unstable internet connection, unfortunately. So one of the things of when you're going big, you always want to make sure there is some redundancy in your innovation. So let's see. For now, I think we might want to open it up to any other questions that some of the attendees might have.
If anybody wanted to ask questions, what you can do is just raise your hand on just click the raise the hand feature on Zoom, and then I'll just let you talk.
We overwhelmed them with our thoroughness.
Well, I guess one thing that I thought was really interesting from what you guys have been saying that I was kind of pulling from it was just kind of how important your stakeholders are for things, and how oftentimes growing up, I had always heard the saying is like a necessity is the mother of invention, and that it's this need to kind of make things better, to kind of fix issues that currently don't work. And it seems like it's very important for people to have that passion to be able to kind of go up against all these different things that are going to tell them no, that's not going to work, that you have to have that commitment to be like, okay, well, how can we make this work? Like the status quo isn't good enough. Like there's so many issues with the way things are, and it's very encouraging to see that we have that no matter which sector that you're in, that need for innovating and kind of pushing the envelope is getting implemented in one way or another.
So I have someone unmuted, John C., and then I have another anonymous question. So we'll start with you, John.
Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the panelists and the innovation. I'm a civil engineer, and I started my career at Caltrans, and what the doctor was saying in regards to them being, more aware of technologies, and I just went on the website she just sent. I really appreciate that. I guess my company, we actually do seismic or structural engineering, and we have new technologies that we'd like to share and get out there. And we've run into roadblocks because, as was mentioned, public agencies do have to be careful in regards to, what technologies they adopt. I guess the question would be, the panelists that are here today, they all seem like they're very open-minded into innovation. And so I wondered if we as listeners have an opportunity to maybe reach out to some of them and share our technologies and innovations so that we could start a dialogue as well. And, what would be the best way to go about doing that? Thank you.
I can quickly respond to that. I think if you go on Caltrans website, it gives you a contact number and you could go through that. You could go through our PIO office, Public Information Office. If you wanted to contact me, you could do it. I would probably forward it to the right channels. Again, we're a public agency, but I'm sure it'll get forwarded very quickly, given that you kind of highlighted it.
I just want to mention Metro's innovation office, and I thought it was pretty spectacular that they actually created a web interface for unsolicited proposals. And I would love to see more public agencies with that sort of forward-leaning invitation. You can literally go on Metro's website and propose an innovation that they haven't thought of, and there's a chance that they'll get back to you and actually negotiate and see if they can hire you to get it done, right? I feel like that's the kind of nimble and inclusive thinking that's really needed given the magnitude of the problems we're facing currently. And I think that bridge is, you know, public and private sector. You know, our approach is not to defend our ideas, but to hope for industry adoption. And that puts a lot of pressure on me and my department to be nimble and to move quickly because, you know, our brand is based on being able to say that we were there first, but not being able to say that we're the only ones that can do something. So our hope is that we get plagiarized like crazy. And, you know, it's partly my job to establish when we have ideas and we think we're the first ones there to make sure that we're clear about being able to claim that, because that's our only real value, right? We're not trying to trademark things. We're not trying to keep other people from doing what we're doing. We're actually hoping everyone does it. And I think that's maybe the culture that we're trying to foster anyway within engineering communities.
Thank you.
Let's see. Nikki, I think there might be a couple other questions, or are there any other questions?
Sure. I think this is going to be just open to anyone who wants to answer. How do we bring innovation to large infrastructure already in use?
Well, I can try to respond to that, but I think both the examples that I talked about was kind of bringing innovation to structures already in use, right? The 101 freeway is an age-old structure. So are all the roads in the Bay Area region. So trying to integrate technology into what we already have. I think that's Caltrans' biggest challenge too, because a lot of our freeways are built out. You know, it's completely developed surroundings. We don't have much right of way, especially in the Los Angeles region, right? It's fully built out. How do you get right of way to expand a freeway? So we're always looking for ways to incorporate technology into what we already have, and making small design modifications. There are you know, lane diet programs that we have for you know, state routes, conventional freeways, where we're taking existing lanes, converting it into parkings for making it, you know, more friendly for the community. We're creating roundabouts, and roundabout design's big for us, and we're considering it at all signalized intersection, you know, when we're doing interchange designs, because that's more friendly for bike users, for multimodality. So I think we're doing a lot of things to actually bring innovation to existing infrastructure.
I'll add a few thoughts. You know, here at Los Angeles, we actually have like 7,500 miles of buried infrastructure. So that's an infrastructure maybe not a lot of people think of, but innovation is really helping us. How do you condition assess? How do you inspect? Whether that's a building foundation or buried pipe, you know, I think those technologies and tools to help you kind of ensure that there's safety and reliability in the infrastructure. That's one component. I think another component is really the sensors and monitoring. You know, you have these asset management programs. People have talked about all the aging infrastructure throughout the United States and the billions of dollars it would take to replace everything. So really just optimization. How do you figure out what can be replaced first to have the maximum benefit and return? And I'd say lastly, infrastructure and extent of just, you know, buildings, things like that, turning it to be, retrofitting it to be more sustainable, reduce the energy consumption, you know, the net zero themes, things like that. I think that's a big challenge because you can't always tear down and start from brand new. There's a lot of, you know, existing urban areas where we just got to kind of work with the footprint we've got.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. but this one I'm gonna skip over to the construction projects and I work also for a public municipality, so it'd be great to have this answer. But sometimes in construction projects, we're held to standards that have been developed decades ago. How would you recommend for us to convince our clients, municipalities / public agencies, to adopt something that is quote unquote non-standard without breaking the bank?
Well, you need a magic wand because it's a litigious and a regulatory industry. So definitely requires some cleverness. And I think really just how do you go about modifying or adopting a new standard? Again, that's a theme of it takes commitment and working with folks that have some experience in standards developments, and those technical committees really helped you. Also setting up pilot projects so that people, again, we talked earlier about themes that people want to see something work before. And I think that's the idea of bench scale or pilot scale things, so that hopefully they can then extrapolate that to something bigger and maybe give you a more fast track approval.
And I'll add to that.
I've done a lot of first permits.
Go ahead.
First, Christine, and then Josiah.
Sure. You know, when you're talking about pilot projects, I think that's really an excellent idea. But I think that people who are innovators have to understand the scale of their pilot versus the scale of what they want us to pay for as, you know, the commercialization of that. And I have a lot of people coming to me with renewable energy projects that they're doing, you know, a 20 kilowatt version in their garage, and it's probably a great idea. And then they want to bring it to a marine terminal that is using, you know, like 12 megawatts of power and scale it up like that. And so I need to see something that's a lot closer, you know, to what we would be using out in the field as your demonstration, you know, not just going from, you know, 1 inch to 12 miles and nothing is in between there. Go ahead, Josiah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. There's a little delay, I think. I was just going to say I've done a lot of first permits, and the first and most important thing is not to treat the regulator as an adversary. I mean, you're going to lose every time. That's not the right approach. You have to understand their constraints and can be interpreted as the regulator innovating. You're probably on the right track, right? So if it's something that's solving issues for them, they're going to be much more receptive. So it's really important to understand what their mandate is and what their responsibilities are, and to make sure that your solution is responding to 100% of the issues that your regulator is responsible for. Very often we have something that we think is a great idea, and we're not thinking of some of the things that it might not be doing very well. So typically, if I'm trying to get a first permit to do something that's never been done before, I'm going to understand why the standard is in place and what it's trying to protect against or protect the public, you know, and then I'm going to solve it like 3 different ways, right? Like not just a little bit, but overkill. Like, let's just get those things out of the way. Like, we're solving all those things. I understand the issues, and here's how we're solving those things. Now let's talk about why we're doing this, because there's this really important benefit, right? And if you can't cover all of those areas, you're not done yet. Because I've seen people just really ignore in water, you know, cross connections. Let's just ignore cross connections, because it's so much more important to be able to have automated, integrated, recycled water that just, you know, has a 3-way valve, for example. And it's like, well, okay, just dig into why there's a code around 3-way valves and cross connections and contamination, and then walk in on day 1 showing, you know, that you've mastered the issue that they have. And once they trust you that you've solved their issue, they're going to lean back and listen to the innovation that you're trying to achieve. But you have to respond to their needs. not to go on and on, but I mean, they're in the way of society moving forward, because that's actually not what's happening. If that's what's happening in your mind, you need to think about it more holistically.
I want to add a couple of things to answer that question as well. I think Caltrans has a lot of opportunities for you to consider non-standards right now. So if you're talking about a roadway project, you can start working with the design team, right from the project report or the plan phase. So we have the CMGC. We've piloted that, we've tested that, we're doing it on some projects where a construction group works with the design team, while the design's in progress. We have something called the value engineering cost proposal, which is a contractor could actually come up with a cost saving. And if it's a non-standard, we'd still look at it and approve it, provided you're efficient and you meet the goals. We're looking at, public-private partnerships, which is again huge and has a lot of opportunity for thinking of something innovative and non-standard. We're not just looking at design build, we're looking at design build, operate, design build, maintain, operate, and transfer. And there are some pilot projects on those. And in general, I think there's a lot of engagement at all levels of our project development. So yeah, don't be afraid of non-standards. We are not anymore.
That's great to hear. Well, I just wanted to thank, we're about out of time. Just wanted to thank our panelists for joining us today and kind of providing a little bit of perspective. And then I also want to reach out and say thanks to all of the attendees who came out. So hopefully the attendees that you've pulled some stuff away from it. I know that if you had any additional questions that haven't been addressed yet, you probably we can reach you out. We can get you connected with our panelists to discuss things more. But just glad that we could help foster this communication, and thanks again for everyone for joining this event.
Chris, on behalf of the panelists, a quick shout out to the MLAB team for putting this together. It was very exciting to be here.